Alright, so finally, after almost 2 months of waiting for beadlock wheels that were on back order forever, they finally arrived, and today I'm working on getting my new tires mounted up on the beadlock wheels. The wheels that I went with are made by Black Rhino. They're 17 by 8.5. Let me unbox another one here. I've got 3 over here that are already mounted up. Only 2 more to go. So that's what they look like fully mounted. I'm going to go through the process of mounting one here. Alright, instructions on how to put together beadlocks. This should be the beadlock ring. Aluminum beadlock ring. You can see the knurls on the back side to grip the bead of the tire. Stuff. Plastic bag. A hairnet. They always put hairnets on new wheels for some reason. I don't know why. And here's wheel. Hardware that looks like it's spilled everywhere inside of the box. There are 24 of these bolts and 24 washers. And it looks like they dumped out of the box and spilled, but hopefully they're all in there. Here's the center cap for the wheel. Black Rhino. Okay. Alright, the first step for putting new wheels and tires together is putting a valve stem in the wheel. For valve stems, I opted to go with these short 1.25" long rubber stems, nice and stubby so they don't stick out past the edge of the wheel. It keeps them protected from rocks. Installing valve stems is pretty straightforward. You poke them through from the bottom and you pull them until this groove seats into the rim. Now there is a tool specifically for doing that. It threads onto the valve stem and it has a little lever arm and you can use it to pry it. I don't have one of those tools here, so another way you can do it is you can use some side cutters and you can grip very carefully between the threads on the valve stem and then use this as a lever to pull that stem through and lock it in place. Like that. That's in place and you can see it's seated on the wheel on the inside. So the next step is to mount the tire on the wheel, and if you're not familiar with how to mount tires, you've never done it before, there are some guidelines for matching the tire to the rim in a certain orientation to help with balancing the tire. All new tires are going to come with dots on the sidewall, a red dot and a yellow dot typically, and these dots correspond with the balance of the tire. So the yellow dot typically corresponds with the lightest part of the tire, if I remember correctly. The red one corresponds to the spot on the tire where it has the most radial run out, or it's kind of like the heaviest spot of the tire. And so normally with alloy wheels, what you want to do to get a good balance is you want to line up the red dot with the valve stem on there. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes it doesn't make that big of a difference if the tires are relatively uniform, and it's not going to make a huge difference, but there are some tires that are, really out of round or out of balance, and then it becomes a little more critical to make sure you line that up. Also, to help with getting the tire on the rim, you always want to use some sort of tire lubricant, and they make a specific tire lubricant for doing that, but a lot of different things work. I like to just use a dish rag covered in soapy water, just regular dish soap, and you can rub that all around the inside of your tire, both sides, and that gives a nice slippery surface to help it slip over the rim, and do the same thing on the wheel. The more soap suds you've got, the easier it is for getting the thing to slip together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to where this red dot is, because I want the valve stem to line up with that. And the valve stem is going to be on this side, so I'll be able to see it lined up. So I'm going to put this red dot down, the ground pointing up that way. Take this wheel with the valve stem close to being oriented like that, and then once I get the front half of the rim in, I can rotate the wheel around inside of the tire. So you start off by working it in at an angle. Sometimes you can stand on it and get it in there. It's easier to do this with a tire machine, but when you're doing it on the ground, you can just jump on it, and that soap helps it slide in. Kind of a fun balancing game too. Sometimes you may have to use a pry bar to get the last little bit of the tire on. You just want to be really gentle with the pry bar so you don't damage the tire or the wheel. Being a little bit stubborn than the other one. Typical, because I'm trying to film it. There we go. Should do it. Okay, so that's down in there now. So let me turn this around so we can see. So the valve stem is close to that red dot, and that's what I want to get lined up on the front edge of the wheel. Another thing, when you're mounting tires on beadlock rims, you want to pay attention to make sure there's not any extra rubber flaps on this inner edge of the bead, otherwise it won't seat nicely in this groove on the rim. If there is an extra flap of rubber sticking down, you can carefully shave it with a razor blade to get any excess rubber off. Alright, I'm going to set this thing up on a bucket. Boom. Down the bucket. Okay. So now the tire's up off the ground, so I can wrestle with it a little better. Get that dot lined up where I want it. Alright, so this dot is now lined up with the valve stem, so that should help with balancing the wheel after it's all bolted together. Okay, so if you see closely here how this bead of the tire, it sits down inside of this lip on the rim. On this side, it's not sitting down there all the way, so you just use a rubber mallet and go around the tire, tap it all the way around until the bead is down in that groove all the way around. Okay, the next step is the hardest step. You gotta put the beadlock ring on and then tighten 24 bolts and a star pattern to put tension on that beadlock ring evenly until you get to the final torque spec, which is 22 foot-pounds and all that. So I'm going to do that in stages now. Okay, now that the hard part is done of torquing all these bolts down, the final step is to air up the tire and seat the bead on the inner side of the wheel. And before I do that, I'm going to rub it down with some dish soap again so that it'll slip over there and the bead will seat easily. So you can see, I like to start all these bolts by hand. I thread them in a couple of turns by hand just to make sure that nothing is cross-threaded, so they go in straight and it doesn't damage the wheel. These particular wheels, they're an aluminum wheel, but they actually have steel inserts where the bolts thread into, so if you were to damage one, you could replace that steel insert in there and you wouldn't have to trash the whole wheel. So that's a nice feature. Some beadlocks have that, some it's just threaded right into the wheel itself, and you have to be really careful with those. Alright, so I'm going to lubricate that back side of the wheel, and then I'm going to start putting air in it. Fun part. No matter how many tires you've mounted up, how many tires you've seated on wheels, every time the bead seats and it makes that loud pop, it's always very startling. I used to work at a tire shop and airing up tires all day. Some days you come home with shell shock from all the tire seating all day long. Just wait, I bet my cameraman jumps when it happens. And all tires say on the sidewall the maximum pressure you can not to exceed when you're seating the bead. This particular tire says it's 40 psi, so you never want to exceed that, because if you get too high of a pressure in the bead seats, it could blow out the whole tire. These tires hold a lot of air, so it takes a while.